welcome to another Australian adventure in Australian literature. So, we've got a book today. Actually, it's a very small book. It's one that I've wanted to do, and I thought that I'd do it. I didn't have a lot of time this week because school's back after the holidays. There is a new book coming out at the end of the month, and I've just been super busy. So I thought, okay, well, it's probably I should do this one because it's only small, and that way I've got enough time to reread it, which I don't necessarily always do, but this one definitely needed the reread. I know I had read it, but I really couldn't quite remember the details, so I gave it a reread. And this week we are doing Julia Paradise by Rod Jones. So that's our book for today. But before we start, remember there is our shop where we have books and writing services and a new book coming out next week. So check that out. In fact, if you go on to our newsletter, you should hear about that, and it should be available for pre-order from Monday. Might be available earlier than that, but should definitely be available for order on my website from Monday. There is also our Redbubble shop where there are over 100 designs. Put 2 new designs on in the past 2 weeks. So if you're interested in supporting us, go check that out. Otherwise, as usual, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Always helps us. Okay, so Julia Paradise. I finished reading this at the dentist this morning, so I was really going down to the wire. This is by Rod Jones, and before I start actually talking about this book, I would like to warn you in case this is an issue for you, which I don't normally do for most books, but this one is particularly about that. It does have themes, and it's not graphic. Okay, it's not graphic, but it does discuss, and it is a major theme in the book of sexual abuse and assault. So if that doesn't seem like you, no problem. I just wanted to let you know before you start. Go check out one of our other videos. We've got tons. Let's talk about Julia Paradise by Rod Jones. So this was Rod Jones's debut novel back in 1986. And it was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Award, so it got some big attention. That is huge attention for a debut novelist in this country. The Miles Franklin, for those of you who don't know, is our premier literary award. So it got a big attention paid to it. Now, Julia Paradise is one of those novels where it's not really about Julia Paradise. It's about another person. Kenneth Ayres is actually the protagonist of this novel. Now, you might have, I think I've spoken before about whether or not you can have an Australian novel that's not set in Australia. I can't remember what that book was, but I know we talked about it. This is another book that is very tenuously attached to Australia. It is Kenneth Ayres, our protagonist, is a Scottish expat in Shanghai, and Julia Paradise, the titular character, is an Australian woman married to an Australian Methodist minister, and they are missionaries in China. This is the 1920s. China is in incredible turmoil. Kenneth Ayres has left Scotland and left Europe after his wife died from the flu in the flu epidemic. He had been a student of Freud and is now in Shanghai as a change of scene that has lasted longer than he expected, living in the Astoria Hotel, psychoanalyzing bored, fraught white women who are the wives of government officials and missionaries and other business people in Shanghai during this time. So they're in the international quarter in sort of occupied colonial Shanghai. And as you read this, you very quickly realize that there are a lot of things happening in this book. Now, it's a very, very slim book, so I'm not going to actually go too much further into the narrative as such than is really on the back, because it's such a slim book. And it's one of those books where when you get to the end, it changes how you view the beginning. So I don't want to actually spoil it for you, because a lot of books, it doesn't really matter if you know how it ends, but this one it does, much like genre fiction. But it's not genre fiction. It's most definitely not genre fiction. So Kenneth Ayres is a fat, privileged, lazy, self-indulgent psychoanalyst in Shanghai, hanging about with other self-indulgent, privileged, well-off white people in Shanghai. And it is, while he is in the Astoria and participating in this very privileged, exclusive world, if you only stayed within characters that Kenneth Ayres speaks to, speaks to who he sees as really as people, you would only speak to other white characters. It's that sort of exclusive world. He is living in Shanghai, and yet the Chinese population around him, the actual people of the city, are none of his concern. And it is into this world. Well, they are at times, but not as people as such. As in this world that he meets Julia Paradise. She is brought in by her husband. She has been exhibiting severe breakdown behavior. She has a narcotics addiction, which Kenneth Ayres starts treating, and he attempts to psychoanalyze her. So far, so straight as a story. The story actually is in 3 parts. There is the initial part where we introduce to Kenneth Ayres and his psychoanalyst and his introduction to Julia Paradise. The second section is Julia Paradise's discussion of her childhood and everything that was happening to her. That is, we are sort of reading this and going, oh my God, little wonder she has a narcotics addiction. This is hideous. And then we go into the third section, which really changes your focus. You think you're reading one, you think like Kenneth Ayres, you are in one world, and then Rod Jones goes and pulls the rug out from under you, and all of a sudden we are in a whole different world. So one of the things that makes this book really interesting, there are many, many things that make this book really interesting, but I think the first thing that you would notice when you pick this book up is it is almost all telling. Now that is an incredibly hard thing to do. It is like 101, do not do this. As a writer, when you have writing lessons, show, don't tell. Now, show, don't tell is generally the piece of advice that is given to inexperienced writers, because when they tell, it's not because they're managing a story and manipulating a narrative in a particular way. It's because they are narrating a film in their head, and that doesn't really work. That doesn't work at all for a reader, which is ultimately what you're trying to get a book to work for. It's actually a book as a commercial thing is not for you as a writer, it is for the reader. It's something that they purchase and engage with. But when a writer who knows their craft writes a book that is predominantly, not all, but predominantly telling, there is some really lush description in this, but it's also a very short, dense book. Telling creates a degree of density. Now, if you are given a book it uses a lot of telling, what you generally find is that you have a book that therefore needs to be read very closely, because you're going to be getting a lot of information very tightly packed, and little things that you think, that I would have disregarded that, but then you go back and you think about that, or you'll read further on and then you'll go back and you think, hang on, there was something about that several pages back, and you go back and have another look at it because it is so tightly packed. I did remember this book. It's the book in Shanghai with the lady with the traumatizing past in Queensland, in far north Queensland, and the pervy psychoanalyst. That was what I remembered afterwards. But reading it again, it was like, oh yeah, there is all of this in the book. I'd forgotten about that, or I hadn't read it closely enough to see that. It's about 100 pages. This is a book you can read in an afternoon. But even if you read it in an afternoon, I can guarantee you will not be just thinking of it. It's not one that you read and then cast aside. It is one that will stay with you and make you think, oh, I wonder of this, and I wonder that, and I wonder, and I wonder, and I wonder. So I think that really dense telling of the story, not showing of the story, is actually partly what allows the very dark subject matter to work, because we don't dwell in it. We move past it. If I had to read just long descriptions and showing descriptions of some of the things in this, it would not be readable. It would not be readable. No one would want to read that. That's the thing, is it would suddenly change from being a book about something to an entirely different kind of experience that would only be attracting certain kinds of people, which is why you wouldn't use that technique. So the way that this book is told is really fascinating. Now, reading it this time, I was able to pay a lot more attention to things, contextual things about the book. On the whole, the character Julia Paradise is a discussion of women and the disposability of women and the use of women. In fact, it is, I haven't seen that many books by men that are as sympathetic and as sensitive towards female characters being used and discarded, and giving them much fuller subjectivity than you can often see. A lot of the time, these are not objectified women. Where there are objectification, it is clearly through the eyes of Kenneth Ayres or other characters. It is not through the author's eyes. The author is offering a significantly nuanced approach to the subject matter that he is working on, which is not something that I would expect from a first-time author, to be honest. It does make it a really interesting in that respect. And I think probably why this book got the attention of the Miles Franklin committee enough to get shortlisted. I can see why it's not a winner. I don't know what the winner for 1986 was, but I can see why it's not the winner of it, but I can certainly see why a book of this nature would be shortlisted, because it is a far more sophisticated book than I would expect from a first-time novelist. So that is quite significant. Reading it through this time, I think it has to do with a lot of contemporary discussion around colonialism and just that being in the zeitgeist. When I read it this time, I really noticed the colonial overtones of it. So you notice the infantilization of the Chinese characters, the calling of what are clearly men serving as waiters and in other ways in the international district, and certainly in the club, boy. These are grown men. These are grown men in a job. They are not children, but they are being called boy, which is an incredibly racist thing to do. You see that not only in this book in relation to the Chinese characters, you also see it in relation to African American. That is used as a pejorative term for African American men. It's a way of diminishing a person's worth, and you see that. You also see that many of these characters are quite racist, and you're meant to see them as racist. You are meant to see, here is this character I felt really sympathetic for. Wow, they called the Chinese workers that. You're meant to do that. You also see the unrest in China. This is 1920s China. This is, they are in an area dominated by Chiang Kai-shek and his Kuomintang soldiers. You also have the wider unrest in China as this period was marked with quite a lot of unrest. Military unrest, political unrest, as China had descended into fighting warlords in different parts of the country after the imperial system had really broken up. So, of course, Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang eventually go to Taiwan. As Mao Zedong and the communists take over in China. But this unrest is seen as like this inconvenience, this something, it's just the natives squabbling. It's not something that Ayres really feels the need to engage with, pay attention to. None of the Europeans, and especially you see the missionaries, which is what Reverend Paradise and his wife are. They're Methodist missionaries. The Chinese need that. In China, and lots of missionaries in China do not see anything that they are doing as, you know what, maybe they don't like this. Maybe the Chinese people don't really like this. That maybe there is an element of, you know what, I think maybe we shouldn't be here. Everything about it from this perspective, Now's perspective, Rod Jones's perspective in 1986, is sort of saying, why are they there? Why are they there? What possible purpose is this serving? And when you look at the end of the book and Kenneth Ayres' redemption arc, which I think is put in not to actually redeem the man, but to ask the question, is this enough? Is this enough? It really, for me, reading it this time, I felt like, oh, so you go into China as a colonial force, you ruin pre-existing social structures, religious structures, because they don't suit you or you don't like them. You lord it over and exploit this country and this and its what it produces and everything else. You watch as the situation deteriorates. You continue to watch as the situation deteriorates. You put in some, Western aid help as the situation deteriorates further, which wouldn't, by the way, be needed had you not stuck your fingers in there and meddled about with it in the first place. And then you leave, thinking, I've done a good job. It's this awful imperialist, privileged, gluttonous, and self-congratulatory attitude that comes through, which is like really interesting when you read it, because do you deserve a pat on the back for humanitarian actions in a mess that you are responsible for partly creating, like where this whole thing would not have happened if you hadn't gone and messed it up in the first place? I don't really think you are. You don't really get brownie points for that, I would say. You don't get brownie points for, especially when, if it gets really bad, you can always leave. Because China is not a settler colonial country. China is a different sort of colonized country. It is an exploited, not that settler colonial countries aren't exploitative, which we will look at in the book that I will hopefully get to next, but it was just too long to read in a week. Not that they aren't exploitative, but also that this kind of colonialism that was engaged in China is equally exploitative, especially when you look at a character like Kenneth Ayres and his particular appetites that he probably would be hesitant to engage with if he was still in Europe or in England. But because he is in the Far East, because he is in China, and because he views these people, the Chinese people, as less than, he has no compunction about doing and acting in ways that are rightly reprehensible to any culture. Now, that is also something that this talks about. This is one of the characteristics of Kenneth Ayres is his great weight. He is corpulent. Rickshaw drivers have difficulty in getting started when he takes a rickshaw. He is immense, and his immensity is part of a visual manifestation of his gluttony and his overindulgence. And his overindulgence is not just food. So, there really is that sense of, who are you to tell anyone how to be well? And that also comes across the concept of colonialism. Who are you to tell anyone how to run their country? Who are you? You are you exploitative colonialist society that is using this purely for exploitative purposes. Who are you to tell people how to run their country? Who are you to object when turns out they're not terribly happy about you? They're not grateful. That's one of the things that the missionaries seem to have difficulty with, the ingratitude. And it's like, well, nobody asked you to come here. Nobody asked you to come here. Nobody wanted you here. You turned up and started changing things because they didn't suit you, or you didn't agree with them, or you didn't think that they were morally right, and you wanted to assuage something in yourself. So there is a lot in this little book. It's tiny. You sort of think, how is all of that in this tiny little book? But it is, and that, I think, is the extraordinary power of this little book. It is told very simply, but it is incredibly dense, and it makes you think, and it makes you keep thinking about it. So that is Rod Jones's Julia Paradise. I do really recommend it, but again, keep in mind the trigger warning that I would give for this is it does have a lot of very dark material. So if that is something that you are sensitive, that is sensitive for you, probably skip this book. We've got plenty of other books that we have a look at that isn't an issue with. But because that is a central theme in this, I would give that warning. That is our book for this week. Next time I should be bringing Killing for Country by David Marr, unless we end up having a lot of a rush and have to find something short, but I don't think I will, because I think I'm running out of short stuff. I really think I'm running out of short things. So hopefully we'll be bringing Killing for Country by David Marr. I've wanted to bring that for a while. I bought it as soon as it was out. It's like, oh, David Marr has a book out? Yes, please. So that is what I will bring you next time. And until then, happy adventures in Australian literature. Bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.